Hello, welcome to International Forum. Today we're going to talk about Afghanistan. 7 years after the United States invaded Afghanistan in response to 9/11 to ouster the Taliban government, to destroy the Al-Qaeda, and to find Osama bin Laden, all is not well in Afghanistan. With us to look at what is going on in Afghanistan and to help understand it and to see where it might be headed, we have with us someone who knows the leadership well, the government, the country, the military commanders. Our special guest, Ambassador Robert Finn. Ambassador Finn has been on our program before, and he served in Afghanistan from 2002 to 2003, and before that he was the American ambassador to Tajikistan. And currently Ambassador Finn teaches at Princeton University. Welcome back.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, welcome back. It's really nice to see you again. Please give us a very, very quick survey of the situation on the ground in Afghanistan. The situation is deteriorating to the point where it's really at a critical junction now, is it?
It certainly it has been deteriorating. The security situation has certainly been very visibly deteriorating in the last year. I don't know that it's at a critical juncture. I think it's in the middle of a process that can be turned around. There are lots of factors at play. One important factor is what's going on in Pakistan next door after the elections. The attitude of the Pakistani government towards the war on terror may change. Nawaz Sharif is saying that we have to talk to these people. There may be some of these people that we can separate with negotiations and bring onto our side, and I agree with him. I think that's good. But the strong support that Pakistani President Musharraf has been giving to the United States for the war on terror may be altered, and that's an important factor. Aside from that, there are a lot of good things that are going on in Afghanistan, along with the bad things. Bad things tend to make the press, unfortunately.
Right, we'll talk about that because in the media, you always read about suicide bombing, you read about firefights, and someone said that there are really 3 conflicts going on concurrently in Afghanistan. You have the Taliban, you have the Al-Qaeda, and you have these criminals. Can you talk a little bit about each? Al-Qaeda first.
Yeah, there are 3. Actually, I would say 4, because aside from these 3 things, all of which generate headlines regularly, you also have what I believe is the basic struggle in Afghanistan, and probably in the end the most important one, and that is to bring this country up from its position as one of the poorest countries in the world, a country that the Brookings Institution recently said is one of the 4 failed states on the planet. We had the former Secretary General Special Representative in Afghanistan, Tim Koenigs, here 2 weeks ago, and he said that if in 20 years the international community can raise Afghanistan from being the 4th poorest country in the world to the 20th poorest country in the world, that would be a miracle. So that's important.
Yeah, but regarding that, to raise Afghanistan from poverty, people say, well, you can't do nation building because of the security situation. So it's a chicken and egg kind of thing.
It's very much a chicken and egg thing. You have to do them together. And to get back to your first question, the 3 areas of fighting. The fighting against Al-Qaeda, in a sense, you can say that it is going better, even though the numbers are worse, because we have, in fact, caught a lot of middle-level and some senior people, and so and a lot of the Al-Qaeda fighters were kicked out of Pakistan by the people there last summer. So we're fighting directly against them in Afghanistan. So you're seeing more violence, but there's a reason for that. With regard to the Taliban, there are lots of things that are going on there, and in fact,
are they spreading? They were in the east and south, Helmand.
There is violence nationwide now that was not there before. But in fact, if you look at where things happen, something like 70% of the incidents is still happening in Helmand province in the southeast. And there are large parts of the country that are that are safe, which doesn't mean that particular events don't take place, like the blowing up of the Serena Hotel
in Kabul.
And the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have very much been able to bring violence to all parts of the country, as they said they would. Nevertheless, in a good half of the country, things are more or less calm all the time. But I don't mean to mitigate the fact that security is, in fact, overall not as good as it was, certainly when I was there, but even as late as last year or the year before. Okay, what the government is trying to do is to bring development along with security to these areas, and you have to do that. People can see the troops come in, but they also know the troops are going to leave, and then they have to have something to live with afterwards. You have to bring them a promise for the future that will make them be committed enough to your side so when the Taliban come back in, as they will, they don't want to work with them. You have to give them something. The Taliban are hiring people in the southeast. It's one of the reasons they're getting soldiers, because they're paying good money in Afghan terms for young people to come and work with them. Well, there's no economy. People are not going to sit and starve to get the debt for our ideals. So they're joining up with them.
Talk about, you say there's no economy. What happened to this aid, that the international aid that's been pledged, but that's been said to come ever so slowly?
Well, the aid, there's just been a new report put out by Oxfam showing what I've been pointing out to people for years, that the amount of aid pledged and the amount of aid given is not at all the same. Even the United States.
There's a big gap, is what you're saying.
A very big gap, a very big gap. The United States has pledged $25 billion, and we've given $15 billion. The international community has done worse than that. Aside from those amounts of aid, the aid per capita for Afghanistan is shockingly beneath that which has been given in almost every other international situation, in a country that is huge, and that has no infrastructure to speak of. So they've set up a situation that's predictably going to fail because you're not giving people the wherewithal. It's like you say, all right, we want to have Sunday dinner for the whole family. Here's 17 cents. Go out and buy the food. Well, you just can't do it.
So why so little and so slowly? Why?
Partly is because bureaucracies work that way. You're in a situation. For example, when I was there, we looked at the initial aid that was given. We said, well, this isn't sufficient. We have to double this for next year. So we sent to Washington to double it. It took months for Washington to decide to do it. Then they passed it through Congress. Then they issued the money. Well, now it's 2 years later when the money comes. Well, by this point, you need twice that already again. All right? So that syndrome is very much part of the situation, particularly when it's new. It's also because people get distracted by other things. Such as the Iraq War or other emergencies. Some of the money that was supposed to go to Afghanistan was rerouted for the aftermath of the tsunami in South Asia. Other things impede on what you're doing. So there's always competition for limited amounts of money. Now we're faced with an international financial crisis. Are people going to be able to meet their pledges next year? I don't know.
You mean the financial crisis triggered by the subprime
right.
lending?
You know, if you consider that everybody has lost 15% of their money, well, governments have too.
True. Yeah, but isn't it also a matter of a policy imbalance? I found this fact, which I thought was astounding, that we're spending, or international aid money is about $7 million a day in Afghanistan, but we're spending $100 million a day on military needs.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, that is true, and that is typically true, that military spending outweighs civilian spending by a factor of, I usually say, about 10 to 1. That is true. And another thing that's true is, as Senator Biden pointed out recently, if I remember correctly, something like all of the assistance that we have given to Afghanistan in the beginning is equal to what we spend in 2 weeks in Iraq on the war.
Yeah. And also there are reports that much of this money, as much as one half, never, in fact, enters Afghanistan. It goes to corporate profits, to the American companies and they're subcontractors.
That's absolutely
Profits.
true. That's absolutely true. We've seen some reports in the paper about these things in Iraq, but the same kind of things are true in Afghanistan. In fact, there's just a big report in the New York Times today about an arms dealer who has received hundreds of millions of dollars from the U.S. government and has been sending ammunition that's 30 and 40 years old and completely useless to Afghanistan. This is a scandal that just erupted today. More things like that will happen. And it's just as true in assistance, because the contract is given to Company A, or NGO A, which is in the United States, and their administrative costs are usually somewhere around 20%. That's off the top. That's before you even do anything. And then frequently they subcontract to someone else who then takes his share. And maybe there's a third person. And then finally get there. So yeah, a lot of the money never ever reaches Afghanistan.
It's almost like a retail a distribution system where everybody skims off a layer.
Right.
And so very little, in fact, gets to where it's intended.
Right. And the cost of having foreign consultants to come in and help is very, very high compared to hiring local people who sometimes are available and just as qualified to do the job.
I have also seen a report about that American contractors are so much more expensive than Afghan the contractors. For example, what this article said was it costs 4 times more to build a mile of road in Afghanistan by an American contractor than if you hired an Afghan contractor.
That may very well be true. There are other factors in there, and I'm sure the American contractor will say our road will be there 3 years from now, his road won't be there 3 years from now. So that part of it is true. I mean, all of these things are for a reason, which doesn't mitigate the fact that, yeah, it's a lot more expensive to have American contractors come in. And part of that is built into our legislation. The money is given with strings attached saying it has to be given to American firms. Okay, so they give the contract to the American firm, who then hires a Turkish contractor or a German contractor, who then goes out and hires the Afghan firm to do the actual work on the road. This is very typically the way it happens, and this is not unique to Afghanistan.
So overall, what would you say have been the impact of international aid in Afghanistan? Have they done a lot of good? That things would be a lot worse?
Of course it could be a lot worse. The per capita income has trebled. The number of infant child deaths has gone down by 20%. Any of those abstract parameters are looking very good. But then when you look at what that means on the ground, it means that instead of one of every 4 kids dying before 5, now 1 of every 5 kids dies before 5. 3 times almost nothing is still not a large sum of money. Afghanistan is still at the bottom of the list. But yeah, there's been a lot of progress. There's been a lot of progress in many, many different places. Expectations, of course, were much higher, as always, than the reality is. And the difficulties, the physical difficulties of Afghanistan are something that people had not experienced before. And if you look at Rwanda, if you look at Bosnia, you're dealing with countries where it's fairly easy to do work. In the case of Bosnia, a country where you had a whole European infrastructure in place that could be fairly easily repaired. In Afghanistan, you're dealing with a place that has never been touched before, by and large. In Bamiyan, this year, in the province of Bamiyan, they're building the first paved road, first ever. And this is in a province the size of Connecticut. They now have a generator working in Bamiyan City to give electricity a few hours a day. First time ever. It's a very, very difficult place to work.
So it will be a really long and slow road.
It's a long and slow road. I think that we have to plan on being there for at least 15 years. At least 15 years. To bring Afghanistan up to the level, let's say the security things go well, okay, separate issue. But if we do not bring Afghanistan up to the level of being economically self-sufficient, as a poor country, but economically self-sufficient, it's all going to fall apart all over again. I mean, it happened because of poverty to a large degree. We have to alleviate that.
Right. Now, of course, if you can improve the security situation, so much the better. So let's look at NATO and what it's doing there. Tell us about the NATO mission in Afghanistan now. How many troops are there?
There are, I think, about 43,000, if I remember correctly. Yeah. The NATO mission there is in trouble because of there's something called caveats, which means that NATO troops are there with, each of them has a different agenda of what they can and cannot do. And what that means quite clearly is that some countries are fighting and losing people, most notably Canada and the United States, the UK, and the Netherlands, and other countries are there, and they're not allowed to participate in that fighting. They may
like
be
Germany, right?
Like Germany, like Italy, like a lot of other countries.
So what do their soldiers there do?
They're doing development work. They're doing support work. They're helping the soldiers who are fighting, perhaps in transport facilities and medical things. They're doing many other things. But if you step back from Afghanistan as a problem and look at a military alliance, a military alliance whose basic premise is an attack on one is an attack on all, that then responds in a way where some of the soldiers get to go and do the fighting and others of the soldiers are not allowed to do that, that's a military alliance that has trouble. That's troublesome for all of the soldiers, because they're soldiers and they're trained to be in a military action. And so the ones who can't fight, who can't do that fighting, are troubled by that fact. And the ones who are fighting are troubled by the fact that these other guys can't do it. It's an unpleasant situation. Canada said that it was going to pull out unless at least 1,000 more soldiers were given by the other NATO countries. There was a meeting in Brussels 2 weeks ago, after which the French foreign minister said that they were laying out a plan for a shared political understanding and a further commitment on the part of all the NATO countries to stay in Afghanistan. Well and good. What you need are more troops there. France apparently is going to send some more troops. At least that's what today's paper said, quoting President Sarkozy.
How many is he sending?
I'm not sure. 1,300 comes to mind, but I'm not sure.
That's a very significant number.
It's a significant number. They're going to talk about this next week in Bucharest at the NATO summit and talk about the whole issue of NATO commitment and NATO relationships in Afghanistan. Germany has said that it may send some more troops.
But not to fight.
Probably not to fight, although actually the German commitment allows them to certainly do defensive fighting. So there's some
very gray line.
There's a gray line there. Anyhow, they're supposed to talk about all of these issues in Bucharest. Now they've invited former Russian President Putin to talk, and I'm afraid that and the question of is there a new Cold War is going to overshadow the very immediate problems of NATO in Afghanistan. But you should also remember there are lots of other countries who are fighting in Afghanistan, not just NATO. There are commitment from many, many people, because this is not just a NATO war. It's not a U.S. war. This is a United Nations sanctioned intervention on the part of the world community.
That's
and that
important
is a very,
to remember.
Very important distinction, because we had the war in Iraq with all of the problems there that I'm not going to go into today. People have been conflating the two and saying they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. This, like the war in Korea, is a case where the international community has said this country has been overtaken by terrorists, and we have to go in and save this country from the terrorists and save the world from this country being used as a base for international terrorism by these people. That problem still very much exists, and they've made it very clear that that's exactly what they intend to do if they win. So I maintain we still don't have a choice there. We have to win this one.
Now, the United States used to have its own command in Afghanistan, but a year or two ago, it came under NATO command. Why was that decision made? Did the U.S. want it that way, or did NATO ask that U.S. to come under NATO command?
There are actually two commands there. There's a NATO command, and there's a unified command that does a lot of the fighting. That's still headed by General McNeil, by an American general. So there are two of them. I think it was I'm not sure who asked whom. I should know, but I don't. But I think it was a decision that was made for a practical division of the fighting, i.e. NATO would be there intentionally to be peacekeepers in the area to bring stability to a particular part, whereas the combined command under General McNeil will continue the active fighting against the Taliban. In actuality, they share these things. Okay.
Now, I have a question on on Pakistan, specifically the Northwest Frontier Territories, the Waziristan area, where it's said to be the hideout for the Taliban and Al Qaeda. And I think you had talked before on the program that the border is so porous that the Al Qaeda and Taliban can run back and forth. If they get chased in Afghanistan, they're going to Pakistan, and then they come back in. Do you think that the border could be sealed and should be sealed between Pakistan and Afghanistan?
I think it would be impossible to seal that border. The geography is incredibly rugged. There isn't transportation. There aren't facilities for security along that border. You need to get an understanding with the people on both sides of the border. One of the to get them to stop supporting and facilitating Al Qaeda and the Taliban.
But do they have a choice? Because the Al Qaeda and Taliban will say, well, do what I say or you lose your head.
They do have a choice because the Al-Taliban is not a monolithic organization. There are many different people, different tribes who are involved in different ways for different reasons. And there's a lot of flexibility there that could be worked on. And this is something that Nawaz Sharif in Pakistan has called for, but it's something also that I believe is true. In the Pakistani elections, and let me just sidebar, there are three separate elements on the Pakistani side of the border. One is the Northwest Frontier Province, okay, which is a part of Pakistan proper, mostly inhabited by Pashtuns and other tribals. Then there are the tribal areas along the border, which are administered by the tribes, by tribal leaders called Malaks themselves. And
would
there are
that be north of
Waziristan, Wana, there's Swat, there are a number of them along the border. And then there's the province of Baluchistan, again part of Pakistan proper, which has been in a very troubled relationship with the government in Islamabad over exploitation of natural resources and what they feel is discrimination. So that's Al-Qaeda is there. Their headquarters are in Quetta, in Baluchistan, and they're bringing in all of their supplies through Baluchistan. It is possible, I'm not saying it's probable, but it's possible that a new Pakistani government will be able to come to some better understanding with the Baluchi people in Baluchistan and work on that part of the issue. In the Northwest Frontier Province, very, very significantly, in the recent elections, the people voted out the Islamic parties that have been ruling the province and voted in the Awami National Party, which is a secular Pashtun party. This is very, very important. It shows that the people there don't want this anymore. They want to get rid of this, okay? Now, how that will play in the tribal areas remains to be seen. In the area of Wana last summer, there was a fight in which several hundred Uzbek members of Al-Qaeda were killed. Hundreds more were thrown out there. The people we're now seeing fighting in Helmand in Afghanistan. These very strict Salafi Islam of Al-Qaeda is not necessarily going to integrate complacently with the way the Pashtuns live in their tribal territory. So I see this as something that we can work on to separate these two. Okay, so you may be able, and when the Pashtun tribal leaders tell their people don't support these people, they won't support them. Al-Qaeda is not in such overwhelming numbers that they can rule in that part. They can't rule. They're guests, and they can be gotten rid of. And I think there's room to work on that. Good. That's what you have to do. But it's going to be very, very hard.
Good.
It's going to be very hard.
Now, we've talked about NATO, the United States, Pakistan, the international community. Talk about Karzai, the government of Hamid Karzai. How effective, how strong a leader, how much are they in control of the country? How much territory do they control?
Well, that's the question that everyone asks. They control a lot of the territory. It's not control because of lack of communication, because of lack of government presence, because of lack of roads and other things. The control is a lot more nebulous than it would be in this country, where you can pick up the phone and tell people what to do, and then it's done. Often government presence in a town will consist of a group of unpaid, unfed soldiers, and that's all that is there of the government. And one of the main complaints is that the government has not been able to make its presence known throughout the country. I've been criticizing them since I was there for not developing a trained bureaucracy who will be able to manage the government, who will be able to go out and be the government presence in a place.
Why don't they do it?
Laziness, I think, is one of the reasons. People have offered to help them. They're very slowly beginning to do it now. They started a military academy in 2005. They have yet to open a civil service academy. So they don't have the administrators. And what that means is that they're then relying on the traditional leaders who are already there, which brings us back to part 3 of your original question, these fighting among warlords. The same traditional leaders, some of whom are good, some of whom are bad, most of whom are somewhere in the middle. They're the ones who are there. So they're nominally allied to the Karzai government, but they're doing a lot of what they want, and they're doing the things they've always done. So money goes into those pockets too. So these are the problems. Karzai is more in charge of his cabinet than he was when I was there, when he had a rainbow coalition of people. But what that means is those people who are not in the cabinet are now in the opposition, and they're working against him. The parliament includes a lot of these people, and they're working against Karzai. So there's a problem between the executive and the legislative branch, which in a country that was not at war on several fronts, it would probably be a good thing. You'd say, well, this is the way a healthy government is. The executive branch does things, and the legislative branch criticizes them and passes laws to make the government behave properly. That's the way it's supposed to work. But you have all of these other parameters that make the whole thing a lot more problematic.
Tell us very quickly, this poppy economy, I guess the Afghan economy, you mentioned there's no economy, but elsewhere I've seen the word poppy economy. It accounts for half of Afghan's GDP and supplies 90% of the world's heroin. What income substitution schemes has the government or has the international community or jointly been tried, and has that not worked?
Well, they have tried certain things. Actually, this past year, there was a $180 million U.S. program, and they exported pomegranates from Afghanistan to Europe and the Middle East and the United States for the first time. There are other things that are going on. Those projects take a long time. For example, the area around Kandahar was famous for its fruit trees and nut trees. But of course, it takes 10 to 20 years to bring back trees. And the Soviets very intentionally destroyed the hundreds-year-old system of underground aqueducts, that fed those fields. So that's something that can be brought back. North of Bagram, they're doing the same thing with the crops there. There are larger economic enterprises that could be brought into play in Afghanistan. Mining. They still have not exploited their oil and gas, which we estimate could bring in several $100 million a year. The Chinese have just got a contract for the Ainak copper mine, the second largest copper field in the world. There are things that could be done there, but it's going to take time. And the farmers only get about 10% of the money from the crop. The money is going to the middlemen and international crime syndicates, and that's where it has to stop.
Can you tell us in 10 seconds your idea of a winning strategy for Afghanistan?
My idea of a winning strategy is to increase economic assistance and train the Afghans militarily, as we're doing, and the police and the government to be masters of their own house, and then to gradually leave.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert Finn, Ambassador to Afghanistan, with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's really good to have you. Thank you for watching. I'm Mei Chang for International Forum. See you next time.